Welcome in to the College Football Power Hour. That's Jason Fitz. He's Adam Breneman, and I am Caroline Fenton. And the game that we can call the game of the season for like the fifth time this year, because I feel like every single week we're getting top 5, top 10 matchups because we're just that lucky. It delivered because there was some chaos, there was some controversy, but ultimately Ohio State takes down Penn State 20-13. Like I mentioned, there were 3 overturn calls in the first half alone. A couple of bad picks. Penn State got the pick 6 early to get on the board, up 10-0 early. But Ohio State really settled in. And Adam, I want to get your perspective as a Penn State guy. I feel like Penn State did a lot of things really well. Ohio State just did them better.
Can we just skip this segment and not talk about the Penn State game? Is that
It's
possible?
not fun.
Yeah, sure.
It's not fun.
There was no game.
Yeah.
Can I come back in the next segment? Yeah. I mean, it just feels like a complete demoralizing game for Penn State. And we've talked a lot about how these games don't matter all that much because of the college football playoff. And you heard James Franklin after the game say, college football is different. We lost this game, but the playoff is still here. And the national championship is still attainable. But man, this felt like the year that Penn State was finally going to do it in the regular season and beat Ohio State. And it was, I mean, to go up 10-0 in this game with a pick 6, it felt like Penn State early in this game was going to control the entire thing. But Caroline, to your point, Penn State did a lot of things well in this game. I thought for the most part, that Penn State's defense played pretty well. To hold Ohio State to 20 points is an impressive job. And then Penn State did some things well on offense, but the biggest takeaway and the reason Penn State hasn't crossed that elite tier on offense yet is they do not have an elite wide receiver. They don't have a guy that can win one-on-one in gotta-have-it situations. Penn State's leading receivers today were Nick Singleton and Tyler Warren, running back and tight end. Penn State, quite frankly, failed this offseason in getting a star wide receiver. Everyone knew they needed one. They got Julian Fleming, who's a wide receiver 2 or 3 at this level, not a wide receiver 1. And that's the issue for Penn State. They failed in that regard, and there could be a lot of reasons for why. People talk about NIL, people talk about the commitment versus the expectation, but ultimately you got to win games on the field. And Penn State failed by not having an elite playmaker that can make plays in the critical moments of this game.
I love the way you said that, Adam, because I think, let's be fair here, Penn State has an elite schemer as an offensive coordinator, but sometimes you need guys that don't need an elite scheme. Sometimes you need guys that can just get open. And this was really an incredible win for Ohio State, in part because of that 10-0. Like, to me, what really impressed me was that Will Howard stayed calm and that they chipped away at it. Like, they never lost themselves. Yeah. Down 10-0 out on the road in an environment that was absolutely just total chaos. In a game that was constantly right on the edge, Ohio State never let the moment get big for them. And I was really impressed with that. I was impressed with the way they handled it. I was impressed with the way they ran the football. I mean, frankly, we're coming off a week where they didn't run the football well at all. And I'm trying to figure out what that means going into this game. Turns out it means nothing, right? Like, Ohio State came out, they knew they were going to have to grind through this game, and they did. And I mean grind intentionally. Both teams really just, everything was in the mud. You were just going to have to get dirty. You were going to have to find a way to move the line of scrimmage. You were going to have to find a way to get a bonus 3 yards here and there. And it just, nothing was easy in this football game. And I thought the fact that Ohio State handled that and still got the win was really impressive for a team that, frankly, you know, their backs were up against the wall. They were desperate. They had to have this win. So I felt like it was a real statement for Ohio State to say, hey, pressure, we can crumple that up. We can handle it. Doesn't matter the environment. We can make it through that.
And I think the poster child of that on Saturday was Will Howard, because he threw the pick 6 early. And I think that it could be very easy to not get back into, to not get settled, to not get back into your good habits. That could be really easy on the road in a crazy environment. I mean, that place looked absolutely insane. It was loud. It could be really hard for a visiting quarterback that got off to a shaky start to just completely go off of the rails. But I thought that Will Howard settled in so nicely, and Will Howard's stats don't really pop off the stat sheet. He was 16 of 24, 182, 2 touchdowns, and then that interception. So there's nothing like overly sexy about the day, but he did what he needed to do. And I know that we haven't talked about this move a whole lot, but a move that I don't think that any of us as college football fans talk enough about is Chip Kelly coming to Ohio State to be their offensive coordinator. I think that he's done such a fantastic job with the evolution of Will Howard. I still don't think that Will Howard is any kind of quarterback that can, drop back and throw for 400 yards and attempt 45 or 50 passes in a game. That's not a recipe for success for the style that Will Howard plays. But I think that you can rely on him so much more now than maybe I felt confident in him doing early in the season, Adam.
Chip Kelly loves to run the football. Everyone forgets about that when you talk about Chip Kelly and the spread offense and how he likes to throw it around. He relies on that run game a ton. And Ohio State went and got Quinshon Judkins and kept Travion Henderson. And that run game is what won them this football game. I mean, when you think about how this game ended, the last two drives of the game, it is, one, a huge testament to Ohio State and, to your point, Fitz, kind of shutting out the noise and winning a game with physicality by running the football after they struggled to do it so much the week before. But for Penn State, could not imagine a more demoralizing way to lose that game. Penn State had the ball on the goal line and ran it 3 times, got stuffed, threw it on 4th down. Ohio State gets the ball back, and they were down 7 at that point, going in to tie the game. Ohio State then runs the ball for 5-6 minutes and chews the entire clock to end the game. Penn State could not get a stop, and Ohio State just inserted their will on Penn State to end that game on their terms. There's no reason Penn State shouldn't have gotten that ball back with 6 minutes left in the game. So Ohio State deserves a lot of credit. That Ohio State offensive line deserves credit to be able to run the football like they did and end the game on their terms. Too. Yeah, I mean, exactly. All the injuries they've had. I mean, that was the talk of the town in at Penn State on College game day. The Ohio State offensive line being terrible. Well, they showed up, and they, quite frankly, in that last 6 minutes of the game, dominated Penn State's front seven.
I think also part of that was set up earlier. Like, this is the chess match portion that me as a football nerd loves. You mentioned Chip Kelly's offense. Early in the game, he was running the football creatively. Like, how do you get to the edge when you're trying to get to the edge around the defense and go sideline to sideline? They did a really nice job of finding ways to get Will Howard to the outside, and then like quick little pitches that looked almost like option plays, but they were really just designed runs that are just forcing everything to sweep out. I thought that was beautiful because as you just keep running the ball in there, you're making everybody aware that you can do this, and then you come back and you just pound the ball up the gut. Like, now you're making people think about it every which way. Like, there was chess being played by Chip Kelly in the way he was calling his runs that I think just really kept Penn State on their heels. That being said, Penn State's defense, to be very clear here, Penn State's defense did enough to win this football game. I know you're right, Adam. They didn't get that stop in the last 6 minutes, but damn, you hold a top 5 team in college football to 20 points. Check the box. You're going to win that football game more often than not. For that not to happen is just the toughest part about this loss. I would love to come in and be like a hot take artist to tell you this means somebody sucks. No, the toughest part about this loss is it literally was 2 or 3 plays. And 2 or 3 plays different, we have a totally different outcome. This was a beautiful game between 2 teams that look like they belong in the college football playoff, that look like they're national championship contenders, that look better. Even in a loss, Penn State today looked better than they have in some of the wins. Even in a loss, they look better than some of the teams that were out here hyping, right? Like, so I look at all of this and say, man, what you had was a heavyweight fight. And unfortunately, somebody got knocked out. Like, I know it doesn't make Penn State fans feel better about the outcome, but man, I felt like Penn State showed up on the defensive side in a lot of ways.
Well, one of the other things, Fitz, that I think is a huge storyline of this game is that Andy Kotelnicki, Penn State's offensive coordinator, was brought in here to win games like this. This is why you go out, and that's why Coach Franklin has made so many offensive coordinator changes. Penn State's offense has been fine against Illinois and Maryland and Nebraska and Minnesota, but their offense has been terrible against Michigan and Ohio State. And in Andy Kotelnicki's first game against Ohio State, Penn State doesn't score an offensive touchdown. It's inexcusable. And now we know that Penn State's going to, I shouldn't say we know, Penn State will still have a high likelihood of making the college football playoff after this game. It was your point, Fitz. Like, they look good, and their defense looked good. Penn State's offense has to find a way to score points in big games like this. And it's upsetting, I think, for a lot of Penn State fans because of this has been the narrative for so long that Penn State's offense can't score in critical games, in big moments when they got to have it, to get the ball down there on the 1 yard line to tie the game and not be able to get in the end zone after 3 runs it's tough to explain to the Penn State fan base, and Penn State fans are not happy if you check Twitter at all. It's not. I think things aren't exactly pretty.
Are they calling for James Franklin's job? Like, are we on fire the coach watch? Not like actually, but from the fan base. Is the fan base firing the coach today?
The fan base says that all the time. I think James Franklin has done a great job at Penn State. I think he would admit he hasn't been great enough, and they haven't been elite. And there's a lot of reasons why. Franklin talks about it a lot. I mean, the reality is Ohio State has more resources than Penn State has. The reality is Ohio State has a bigger NIL budget than Penn State. But at the end of the day, no one cares once you get between the white lines. And the expectation of Penn State is that you play well in your best games. And I think that's the part that's upsetting, is that for some reason this Penn State team looks different in big games than they do in games that aren't big games. That's the part that I think the fans, and I'm sure James Franklin, can't quite figure out.
But that ultimately falls on coaching. If your team doesn't look right, your team looks tight, they play uncharacteristic in big games, like that ultimately does fall on the shoulders of the head coach. I'm not calling for James Franklin to be fired, because I think James Franklin is a very good football coach, and you can do a whole lot worse than going 10-2 and 11-1 every single season. But I do understand that for some Penn State fans, or even a majority of the Penn State fan base, that 10-2 and 11-1 is great. But it's not great when you consistently lose to the same teams over and over again, and those losses are ultimately what comes between you and a conference championship and the college football playoff. Now, I think the expanded playoff is perfect for teams like Penn State, because you said it on our Tuesday show, Adam, the last 10 years, 11, 12 years of the college football playoff, like Penn State would have been in the top 12 in an overwhelming majority of those years. Like this expanded playoff helps teams like Penn State that just can't get over that hump. But I tweeted this earlier, that the worst losses are the ones that you could have had, but you just didn't. Like if you get blown out, that sucks. Like that's really demoralizing. And you might realize, well, hey, we're just not as good as we thought we were. But the games that you had, and you had the opportunity to win, you had the opportunity to put your foot on the gas pedal, and you didn't, against a team that you haven't beaten in nearly a decade, like that is a gut punch when you have an opportunity to be in the driver's seat.
My last thought on this, and then I'd love if we could move on to the next segment before I start crying.
This is therapy, Adam. Get it out.
I know. I'm just getting out all my emotions. Exactly what you say, Caroline. The worst loss is one like this, where during this game, Penn State looked like the better team for a majority of this game. Penn State looked like a college football national championship contender for most of this game, but they could not get the ball in the end zone. 3 red zone trips for Penn State, 3 points from those 3 trips. You're not going to beat Maryland with those numbers. I mean, it just isn't going to happen. So that is, I mean, think if they got 7 points 2 times during the red zone, which is what you should be, at least 66% in the red zone, scoring touchdowns. And they didn't get 1 touchdown in the red zone today. So that's the story of the game, and that's why it hurts so much for Penn State.
What do you always say though, Adam? Like, you learn in a loss, right? There is an interesting moment here because there's so much playoff football left, and that's the.
You trying to be positive for me? I am
going to be positive.
It's glass half full.
Those guys are going to sit in the meeting room tomorrow, and they're going to look at film, and they're going to look at 2 specific things. They're going to look at the inability to get in the end zone from the 1 yard line, and they're going to look at the inability to get a stop for the last 6 minutes. And that's going to sit in their minds. It's going to sit in their bodies. It's going to sit in their locker room. And it's going to sit there for the next week, for the next month, for the next 2 months. And if Penn State can make the college football playoff, the thing that will be on their mind is avenging the opportunity at the 1 yard line. They got their butts kicked on the line of scrimmage from the 1 yard line, and they got their butts kicked on the line of scrimmage from the 1 yard line moving forward when they needed to stop. That's the sort of thing, man, this is where, for all the conversation about James Franklin, we will not remember this game if James Franklin wins a bunch of playoff games. That's just real. So if you're James Franklin, that it's not just coach speak that everything's still in front of Penn State. The thing that Penn State's going to have to do is look in the mirror and figure out how they toughen up. Because when you lose a game the way they lost that game, where they got out-toughed when they needed to stop the most, that's internal. You got to fix that. That comes from inside.
You'll send some T's and P's Adam's way. Like that's the kind of game that like I experienced this as an LSU fan last week that lost to Texas A&M. The feeling of like, why do I even like this stupid sport anyways? Like my life would be so easy if I just didn't have, a team that supported my emotions one way or another week by week. But Penn State,
come over to my
like
y'all come over. Y'all just come over to my island, the isolated island of Switzerland.
Fitz. I don't want to be. I do not.
No.
Want that just misery week after week and year
Nobody
after
does.
year.
Nobody does, especially when I'm sober. But I will say that California's sober. Let's be honest. But I will say this: like my Saturdays are great because I don't care who wins or loses. I don't care. Like Saturdays are awesome. Saturday's my favorite day of the week. I watch football all day, and all I care about is are we going to have something fun to talk about? Like I'm living the life. Come join me. You guys will be much happier.
Fitz is always in a good mood. I've never seen him mad or upset about anything ever.
That's because we don't do a show on Sundays. I mean, like I literally a few weeks ago had to take Crumble Cookie to I got a whole box of Crumble Cookie. I took him to my neighbor because he was out like being super nice. He's sitting on his back porch on Sunday. I had the windows open. He was sitting on the back porch, and I just saw he and his wife get off the porch and go inside because I was dropping too many F-bombs loudly at the TV. See, we do this on Saturdays. I'm a beacon of light in a dark, dark world. Adam, everything's going to be fine. Penn State's going to play LSU for the national championship if the show wins.
Fitz is going to get like the HOA called on him. Of like, Jason Fitz is not allowed to be outside on Sundays. As long as the Raiders are playing, then it's not a family-friendly environment. But let me just say, God bless the bye week, because it is very fun to not have to be emotionally invested into my team this week, at least. But send some love Adam's way. We also got to send some love some other ways, because even in some wins, I don't think that fan bases feel even great about those. We'll get that on one thing we learned coming up next. One thing we learned, Adam, I'll give you a breather. Fitz, what'd you learn?
Okay, so here's the thing. I'm sitting there watching. Yeah, Adam needs a moment and a hug, Adam. If we were in the same city, I would give you just the biggest hug right now. So I'm sitting there watching Miami. And I think we all saw this moment today where Miami goes up early and then Miami goes down pig. And everybody's like, oh my God, Miami crisis. And then Miami just scores and scores and scores. And it reminds me of me playing the college football video game. Like, I don't know if you guys have played a lot of this, but like, I'm particularly good at Madden, and that is transferred over to the college football video game. And I play my buddies, and there's been a couple of times where I'm not really paying attention. And, I look up and I'm like, oh man, I'm on my phone while I'm playing. And I look up and like, my buddy Steve's beat me 21-0. And I'm like, I should really start trying that right now. And before you know it, I beat Steve like 42-21. That's what Miami is doing. It is like, sorry, Steve, man, I love you. Listen to the show. We appreciate that. Now, there's this moment where I look at Miami and the way Cam Ward plays the football, which I think is borderline reckless. Like some of these plays that we're looking at and saying, oh my God, like Twitter was blowing up with one highlight. And I'm like, he threw it. It wasn't even a 50-50 ball. It was a 20-80 ball because it wasn't going his way. And it turned into a touchdown, right? Like Cam Ward has got this reckless abandon to him that like makes for fun football to watch that feels like a video game. Is it going to come back to haunt Miami at some point? Yes. I think we can all agree. Like, I don't think Miami is a great football team, but I also think Miami is capable of scoring in bunches so quickly that all you got to do is blink and you're out of your game plan. And that's the danger Miami's going to place for everybody, Adam, because I don't care who they're playing. I'm not sure they're going to be able to stop a great team, but I am sure at this point that I believe Cam Ward and that offense can put up 20 points before you've even had the chance to think, and a punt equals points. When you're taking on Miami, they will score on it. So they're playing video game football. The only way you're going to beat them is to slow them down. I don't know that anybody can.
But I love that saying, punt equals points when you're playing Miami. That's good. And the other thing that equals points is getting interceptions. And that Miami's defense, for all the bad of how they played this season, they have been able to force some turnovers. And they forced 3 interceptions from Malik Murphy today. I thought that their defense played pretty well despite giving up 31 points to Duke and was opportunistic and got the football back. And that's all you need. If Miami's defense can force some turnovers, 1 or 2 a game, that's enough possessions to steal from the other team, knowing that your offense is going to get points from every single one. I mean, Cam Ward is just electric. You said it, Fitz. I mean, 400 yards passing, what he does with his legs, running the football, not even in the run game itself, but more just like evading pressure and escaping the pocket and how elusive he is. They didn't even use him much in the run game today, but his ability to create with his legs, and then they have an elite wideout in Xavier Restrepo.
Yep.
I mean, he is special. It has great feel, always seems to be open. Had a few, I think he had 2 or 3 touchdowns today. So They have the pieces, and if that defense, they don't need to be great, but if they can just get some turnovers, get some stops, get the ball back for Cam Ward, it's a formula that I can see the path for how they get to the national championship.
But and real quick, I'll say this. Haven't we seen the quarterbacks of almost every one of the best teams this year at times just get reckless with the football when they're throwing picks, right? So if all they have to do is be opportunistic, man, I mean, we watched Carson Beck throw how many interceptions today? We've seen, Caroline, you've seen Garrett Nussmeier times make decisions that have us all say, what are we doing, right? Like, we watched A&M's quarterbacks collectively throw the football up on 50-50s that make no sense. Like, there have been so many times that we've watched quarterbacks put the ball at risk this year. It seems to be a trend. So if all they have to do is be opportunistic, maybe we're sleeping on just how far Miami can go.
And I don't think Miami's defense needs to be elite. I don't even think Miami's defense needs to be good. If Miami's defense is average, they're a national championship contender. But you say that, you don't know how much you can trust Cam Ward to consistently do this week in and week out and consistently be like the greatest eraser in college football. I'm with you. I'm with you wholeheartedly. But I don't see that coming back to bite Miami in the butt in the regular season. It will happen in the playoffs. And I think that Miami can step aside and say, okay, we made it to the playoff. They can win a playoff game or two. They could very easily win the ACC and get a first round bye and be on a fast track to get to the national championship. So even with a defense that at times is just truly dreadful, they have the great eraser in Cam Ward. And I think that there is still very much so a path where Miami can contend for a national title. But I'm glad that you bring up Carson Beck, Fitz, because that's what I learned today. We should not be talking about Carson Beck in the Heisman Trophy conversation. And I don't know why he continues to pop up in the conversation over the past couple of weeks. I'm so sick and tired of the Heisman Trophy race being a popularity contest. And it's just the quarterbacks on the best teams in the country. Sometimes the quarterbacks on the best teams in the country very much so are Heisman contenders and should be talked about in that conversation and should be in New York City in December. But sometimes they're just not. Carson Beck threw 3 interceptions against Florida today. That's not really an intimidating Florida defense, and it made this game super uncomfortable for Georgia. Now, the final score I don't think is very indicative of how that game went. Georgia was able to win it by 2 touchdowns, but you guys watched this game. That was not a 2-touchdown performance where Georgia was better than Florida for a majority of 4 quarters. He threw 3 picks against Texas, 2 against Mississippi State, 3 against Alabama, plus that fumble against Alabama. So in his last 5 games, he's turned the ball over 12 times. Like, Georgia is winning games in spite of their quarterback's decision making. You bring up Cam Ward. Cam Ward, I think, is the perfect candidate for the Heisman Trophy because Miami is winning games and is a national championship contender because of what Cam Ward does. Miami might be like an 8-4, 7-5 football team with an average quarterback. That is a Heisman Trophy contender. That's what won Jaden Daniels the Heisman Trophy last season. Carson Beck just so happens to have all the talent in the world around him. And he's not a terrible quarterback. He can do what he needs to do. He led a handful of scoring drives when Georgia absolutely had to have it. There are times when I think Georgia fans do feel at ease when Carson Beck has the ball in his hands. But if I'm a Georgia fan, I'm sitting on the edge of my seat every single time Carson Beck drops back because he is so reckless with the football, Fitz.
Yeah, and it makes no sense. Some of the throws you looked at today against Florida, you're just looking at it saying, man, you've been playing too long to do this. And I was reading a mock draft because I'm that sick. I was reading a mock NFL draft the other day that had Carson Beck as the 3rd quarterback off the board in the top 10 pick. And you clip this off, save this, NFL fans. You just wait till the draft comes along. If your team selects Carson Beck in the 1st round of the NFL draft, you are screwed. There is no nice way to say this. Carson Beck excelled when he had Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey as his weapons. We've talked about it on this show. Like, the real reason that Brock Bowers looked great last year at times was because he had 2 absolutely epic elite weapons around him that were simply better. When the competition is even across the field, when they have a level playing field and there isn't that same plus advantage between his weapons and the defenders, Carson Beck is not capable of elevating the players around him. He has not shown that so far. He is not worthy of the reputation we're getting. He's a fine quarterback, but you don't get a national championship and this level of hype and everything that we're putting around Carson Beck unless you're fine. Stop treating him like he's epic when he's just okay.
Fitz, the only two quarterbacks I'd be comfortable with my NFL team drafting right now are Shadur Sanders and Cam Ward. Everybody else, I think, is the crapshoot right now. But Carson Beck, I was looking before we got on the show just at his stats throughout the season. And Caroline, you mentioned his interceptions at some of those big games. In the biggest games, Carson Beck has been horrendously bad taking care of the football. And the only times he's taken care of the football has been when they play terrible opponents. So that's a bad combination. If you're a Heisman Trophy quarterback, you play your best in the big games. Point blank, that's what good players do. Carson Beck's only taking care of the football when they played like some FCS team in week 2 and then Kentucky when their offense was terrible and didn't even throw the football. I mean, he has 11 interceptions in his last 5 starts. That you get benched at most schools for that. I mean, that just to clarify, throwing 6 picks in your last 2 games is worthy of being benched at most programs in college football. That is like, it's time to make a quarterback change talk at most places. So Carson Beck's been bad, and I don't care how many big throws he's made. You can't turn the football over. That is the number one job of a quarterback. It doesn't matter. Nothing else matters if you turn it over, and he's done that at a scary high rate the last few weeks.
Carson Beck is the reason I don't believe Georgia can win the national championship this year. It's just that simple.
Good point.
And then when we get into playoff football and everything's elevated and the margins are even thinner and these teams are all very good and you're going on the road and you're doing all these different things, I do not trust Carson Beck against quality opponents to be able to win a natty this year.
I did a radio hit earlier this week, and the host asked me, who outside of Georgia do you trust in the SEC? And I said, you know what assuming does? Do not assume that I trust Georgia, because I don't. And the reason why I don't is because of Carson Beck. He threw 6 interceptions in 14 games last year. He threw 6 interceptions in the last 2 weeks.
That's 2.
I know that the offensive line's banged up. I know you lose your security blanket in Brock Bowers, but you're a big boy now. And you're not making big boy decisions. Adam.
Yeah.
We better now.
Caroline.
What did you learn?
Yeah, I'm better. I'm back. I'm ready.
Other
to
than
talk
all
ball.
things are
all right,
bad.
we're fired up. Let's go. Let's go.
I am back. And you mentioned, who do we trust in the SEC? Well, Ole Miss is back in business. They're back. We thought they were gone. We thought they were going to just ride off and just never be talked about the rest of the season. Lane Kiffin was going to quit. Ole Miss beats Arkansas 63-31. Absolutely dominates them on offense. Jackson Dart, 500 yards passing. Charlie Weiss Jr., the offensive coordinator, called one heck of a game. They were, the way they used pace and tempo to control that game, that is like textbook Lane Kiffin offense. Show them the tape from the Arkansas game. That is what they do. They play fast. They use tempo to their advantage. They spread a defense out, and their quarterback makes great decisions and distributes the ball on the perimeter. It was perfectly executed, and Ole Miss, with those 2 losses now, plays Georgia next week. If Ole Miss wins that game, they are right back in the playoff picture with those 2 losses. And they can be spoiler to Georgia and knock them out of the picture. And Ole Miss is not in the driver's seat, but they're back in the mix after thinking they were knocked out with those 2 losses earlier in the season. So it was exciting to see, because I've been a fan of Jackson Dart. I think he's a great quarterback, and it was disappointing to see that loss to Kentucky, the struggles. He certainly came to play today.
Yeah, I think I'm going to call that matchup with Georgia the trust issues game. Because I don't I have trust issues with Lane and Jackson in a big game against Georgia. I got trust issues with Carson Beck. I got trust issues with all of them. But as a guy that picked Ole Miss and Oregon as my natty, like that was my national championship game pick in total chaos. I really need Ole Miss to just squeeze into this thing and then somehow shock the world. So I'm good for this, Adam. I'll go for this 100%. I want to buy Jackson Dart and Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss, because on paper, everything about it makes sense. Everything about his ability as an offensive play caller makes sense. Everything about the amount of talent Ole Miss has makes sense. Everything about the way Ole Miss attacked the transfer portal to address their weaknesses, it all makes sense to my very logic-oriented mind. What doesn't make sense is they already have 2 losses. So, like, I have trust issues with Ole Miss, but I would love to see this, because that's the absolute pandemonium that I need in my life.
There's one thing that I liked about Ole Miss today and one thing that I didn't. And I'll start with what I liked. Pro, con, con, pro, but we're just going to pro and con. I felt like Ole Miss over the last few weeks, either lost that LSU game because they struggled offensively, or they won games in spite of their offense and was winning games because of how stifling their defense is. I mean, they had 10 sacks against Oklahoma last week and only put up 26 points. Jackson Dart kind of struggled in the first half, so crazy to think that a Lane Kiffin coach team that in the beginning of the season against, rinky-dink State University, they were putting up 75 points a game and 700 yards of offense. Well, Ole Miss was winning games because of the defense. They didn't do that today. They won the game because their defense was stifling. They had 8 sacks on Taylor Green. They forced turnovers, and they put up 63 points. And Jackson Dart had, do you remember in 2012 when Johnny Manziel went viral for the Scooby-Doo costume, and everyone's like, oh no, Johnny Manziel doesn't take this game seriously. He's out on a Thursday on Halloween before the game on Saturday. And then he had a freaking Heisman moment. Well, Jackson Dart went viral for the exact same thing, dressed up in a Dumb and Dumber costume out on the square in Oxford. And everyone was saying, oh, Jackson Dart's not taking it seriously. Take Arkansas with the points because Jackson Dart's out on the town. Well, he had his Johnny Manziel post-Halloween game today. The only thing that still gives me pause is Ole Miss is still struggling to run the football. And if you look at their season stats, I think they might be top 3, top 5 in the SEC and rushing, but so much of that is overinflated by what we saw against lesser competition. I mean, Ole Miss, even in a 63-point day, was still only running the ball for about 3 yards a crack. They struggled to run the football against Oklahoma the week before. So that is what makes me nervous about Ole Miss, is Jackson Dart can take the game over with the ball in his hands, but I don't want him to every single week, especially if we're talking about the postseason, Fitz.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant point by you, and something they got to figure out. It feels like at times this year, part of their running issue has caused them to lose their rhythm in drives. You watch this Ole Miss team, and I feel like sometimes they're so reliant on big, huge plays just being the thing that gets them from point A to point B. I don't know how much that works when you're taking on the best of the best. You got to be able to grind your way through it, right? We all know that. So I agree with you. Being able to run the ball more efficiently would help them. It would also help them sustain drives, which would help their defense too. So there's some math to that works. Sometimes you can just get so reliant on, hey, I can pick up 30 yards here and 40 yards there, which is what Ole Miss has done for years. And that's what disappears when they play good teams. And that's why, that's where the trust issues come from for me, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, but if Ole Miss plays the way they play today, they don't need to run the football very much. I mean, there are some offenses, if you're not going to run the football well, you better be extremely explosive on offense. And that's what they were today. So now they haven't been that way all season. So we'll see how it all plays out. But the best, something that helps when you don't run the football well, when you're not a run-focused team, is having a great defense. That combination, not being able to run the football well and having a defense that doesn't play well, you're going to lose every game you play. But if you have a great defense, then you have an explosive offense that, maybe struggles to run the ball, but can score points and throw the ball on the field. That's an okay combination. And, I'm with you. I don't know how much I trust Ole Miss right now, but we're going to find out a lot next week and see how they show up and play against the Georgia defense. That's obviously really good.
Trust issues game. It's like walking into a room with all your ex-boyfriends. Trust issues game. Coming up next, some serious conference chaos that unfolded on Saturday. Conference chaos. And we knew that it was inevitably going to happen, but we also convinced ourselves that, hey, everything is going to work out. Everything always works itself out. Right now, working itself out feels like a very far cry from now until the end of December. We saw 3 teams undefeated in conference play. 3 teams that I think would be fair that we all viewed as potential college football playoff contenders, or surely college football playoff contenders, fail today. Fitz, Clemson got that butt whooped by Louisville.
Yeah, stick a fork in them. They're done. And this is just where they are now. And here's the thing. Can't have nice things. We finally say a bunch of nice things about Clemson. We finally say, hey, we gave up on them too early. We sit there. We all as a show take the big mea culpa, my bad. We take the whole lap of defeat of, man, we gave up on Clemson too early. And then Louisville just comes in, beats the snot out of them, right? And this is what happens in this. This is where everybody says one game doesn't matter. Well, one game becomes huge for a lot of these teams, because if you're Clemson now, days before the College Football Playoff Committee is going to vote for the first time, days before they're going to sit down and discuss these teams, What you've just given everybody to sit there and discuss about your team is getting your ass kicked by Louisville. And that's just one of those inexcusable losses you're not going to be able to crawl back from. So, I realize that you could try and find me some way, and Clemson fans will at me and find a way that they still make it to the ACC championship game. They win, and they get their automatic bid. Fine. If you want to play make-believe and you want to have a nice little pretend fantasy sandcastle, go ahead. Build it all day long. That's fine. But we can also talk about the fact that if you watch them, Miami looks really good. We talked about Miami already here. Like, Miami is making a case for trying to be a national championship contender. Clemson's making a case for what this year in college football really is, which is maddeningly inconsistent teams that one week we sit here and say that we're in on, the next week we're done on, and then we're trying to find what the new normal is. Clemson getting their butts beat like this in a game where, frankly, they ran the football really well. In a game where they came in and they should have had the advantage. They should have been able to go in and close this thing out. Getting beat by Louisville is inexcusable, Adam.
Yeah, and all Clemson had to do was win this game. And their schedule's easy the rest of the year. Their only tough game is against Pitt, right? And Pitt got demolished today too, which we'll talk about. So all they had to do was win this game, get through the rest of the season. They played South Carolina last game of the year, but in the conference play, this is what they had to get through. And it's disappointing for Clemson fans with we've talked about it. All that Dabo Swinney has been against this new era of college football, and how he hasn't believed in the transfer portal, and he hasn't gone out and gotten big playmakers. You can't lose to Louisville. It just cannot happen. And really, a lot of those guys, like Clemson, failed to make big plays in this game on third down when they had to get it, when they had to pick up first downs and move the chains. Clemson really dominated the box score. Other than the third down moments, they played more total yards. They dominated time of possession. They were better on fourth down. So every stat category they were better in, but couldn't make big plays when they had to in this game.
Caroline, think about this too. You started off by saying we have total chaos and we expected that football would take care of itself. To be very clear, there's a difference between Penn State and Ohio State and an Oregon beating up on each other. There's a difference between Texas and Georgia and even a team like Alabama, all of these teams beating up on each other. We expect that. When the best of the best from certain conferences meet up against each other, we expect that there's going to be some give and take. There's going to be some losses taken. You cannot take the loss in today's college football environment when you are not one of the Big Ten teams or the SEC teams. I'm just telling you what's real. The reality here is when you are in the ACC, the Big 12, you cannot take an unnecessary loss to an inferior opponent. You do not have the grace. You are not going to get the grace from the committee. You won't have the same grace that the biggest of the big from the best of the best have. And that's what Clemson is going to learn this year. I think their playoff chances died today with the loss to Louisville. And as much as they're going to sit there and say, well, 2 losses doesn't mean that Alabama's dead in the water. You're right. Because Alabama is just going to be looked at differently. That is the reality, like it or not.
Well, the SEC and the Big Ten are competitive enough and have enough contenders that I think an SEC or Big Ten team can afford to be cannibalized. The ACC is not competitive enough for you, Clemson, to be losing these ACC games. And I do think that a lighter schedule, like Clemson has this season, can either be your greatest strength or your absolute worst weakness. Because if you have an easy schedule and you win all of your games, well, you're 12-0 and you're getting into the college football playoff. You're getting to the conference championship game because you won all of your games. And that is the most important qualifier is, did you win your games or not? Clemson does not have a strong enough schedule and does not have enough opportunities on the rest of their schedule to redeem themselves. They go to Virginia Tech, they go to Pitt, and Pitt got their butt whooped today too. We'll get into that. Then they play the Citadel, and then they end the season with South Carolina, who had a big win today, and we'll get into that. I just don't think that there are enough competitive teams left on Clemson's schedule to bolster up their resume when they got their butts whooped by Georgia week 1. We didn't forget about that. And they got their butts whooped by an unranked Louisville team. There's just not enough opportunities to redeem yourself, Adam.
Yeah, and we talked about how the way Penn State lost that game and how there were opportunities to win it. And that's what makes it so tough for Clemson fans and for Dabo Swinney. Clemson should have won this game. I mean, they were the better team in this game, but in the red zone, missed 2 field goals, had multiple trips to the red zone where they didn't come away with points or a touchdown. So that's a disappointing part for these Clemson fans. And now you look at the ACC. I mean, Miami's clearly in a league of its own. And then, I mean, SMU, who we'll get into in a second, I mean, it won today as well. So, I mean, the ACC is kind of that second team that's going to play Miami in the conference championship game is wide open right now.
I mentioned how South Carolina had a massive win today. South Carolina beats Texas A&M 44-20. And I mean, South Carolina was shot out of a cannon early in that game. I mean, they got massive defensive stops, scored on their first 2 possessions. This is a Texas A&M team that had the inside track to get to Atlanta. They still have the opportunity to get to Atlanta. They still have the opportunity to be a college football playoff team. But Texas A&M is coming off of a massive win at home against LSU, where LSU looked confused for the better part of the second half. Texas A&M had everything ahead of them to set up for a matchup of the century, the 7th or 8th one this season, against Texas later in the final week of the season. But Texas A&M laid a massive egg. This Texas A&M run defense that I thought was one of the best, not just in the SEC, but in the country, with Shamar Turner and Shamar Stewart and Nick Scorton, who I think every single quarterback has nightmares about. Well, they gave up almost 300 rushing yards to South Carolina alone. I mean, Rocket Sanders had 150 yards and 2 touchdowns today. Like, where is this Texas A&M run defense? And where is this Texas A&M run game that we have seen throughout the better part of the season? To be fair, Le'Veon Moss, their leading running back, top 3 running back in the SEC, he got hurt early in this one. That hurts you, absolutely. But I've noticed this trend with Texas A&M. You know, Marcel Reed got the start today. Connor Wigman was the starting quarterback. Texas A&M's most dominant performances, either in an entire game or in parts of games, came when the defense was thrown off by the starting quarterback. Against LSU, Marcel Reed came in, and that was all she wrote. That was the turning point in that game where Marcel Reed just took over the game completely. Against Missouri, Eli Drinkwitz talked all week about how he expected to see Marcel Reed when they played a couple of weeks ago in College Station. Connor Wigman got the start. Missouri's defense didn't really know what to do and didn't really know how to adjust. When defenses have an entire week to prepare for a quarterback, and Marcel Reed wasn't named the starting quarterback until like 5 minutes before the game, but I think we all knew that Marcel Reed was going to get the start. When defenses have an entire week to prepare for the quarterback that they expect, Texas A&M does not look like the same football team. So a Texas A&M's margin for error is now 0. Like, there is still a path. I still see a path, but you got Texas looming at the end of the season. So the SEC now is all messed up. You got several 2-loss teams. Several teams only have 1 loss in the conference. Now Texas A&M falls to 2 losses on the season and 1 in the conference, Adam.
We said this on last Tuesday's show. This just felt like a game that Shane Beamer would have his guys ready to
you did
play.
say that.
Yeah.
And it just felt like it. And boy,
Such a
were we
Beamer
right.
game.
I mean, it's such a Beamer. It just felt like a Beamer game. Like, you just knew Beamer was going to have something up his sleeve. You knew we'd have his guys ready to play. And he did. I mean, South Carolina, you said Carolina, dominated in the run game. I thought Sellers played really well throwing the football. He ran the football really well, which is where that South Carolina offense is at its best when they're using the QB run game. And then they forced 2 big turnovers and got points off those turnovers, those takeaways against A&M. So they also won the penalty battle, which is a big Shane Beamer thing. He talks about it all the time. The game within the game. Can you win the penalty battle? Can you win third down? Can you win the turnover battle? They won those, and that's the reason they won this game. So big. The talk will be all about Texas A&M and how they had a huge opportunity here and blew it. But let's give credit to Shane Beamer in South Carolina in the job he's doing there. And yes, they've had some bad losses this year, and it's a tough place to win, tough conference to win in. But Beamer got his guys to show up in their biggest game of the year.
Yeah, you mentioned the penalty battle, and let's think about this. They didn't even get their first penalty until late in the second half, and it was a delay game call that I think could have gone the other way. It could have been offsides on the defense. Like, this was a clean game played. And Caroline, you mentioned the rushing stats. When you combine all of this, I think what's crazy is that Sanders and Sellers both combined averaged right at 7.2 yards a carry against Texas A&M. So they basically went out of strength with their strength and said, nah, we're fine, and we'll win this game this way. They did. And what do we see so often? Like, Adam, you mentioned, some of the third down opportunities here. We talk about this all the time. If you cannot convert on 3rd and short, and if you cannot stop the other team from running the football, you're going to lose. Texas A&M couldn't convert in short yardage in this game, and they couldn't stop the run. Like, this is a theme for today. This is a theme for every week. We're obsessed with what it looks like to score a bunch of points, but at its core, at some point, you've got to sustain drives with conversions on short yardage situations. You got to be able to stop the run. A&M couldn't do either of those. In Carolina, I'm not as positive. Like, is there a path? Again, I'll be like, if we want to be sunshine and roses, sure, there's a path to A&M getting into the SEC championship game and winning the SEC championship game, and huzzah, everybody, then they get that automatic bid. But my God, I mean, if you're looking around right now and you're just looking at what's in front of them, you're talking about they're going to have to beat Texas, and then they're going to have to win the SEC. They can't take another loss. There's no room for a loss anywhere, and I don't know that they won't need help elsewhere depending on what happens. So it's just it becomes a really wild situation where you come out flat in a game that you need, and all of a sudden it can change your entire ability to make the college football playoff. Like, this season is disproving everything that everybody thought, that when we thought that the playoffs would actually marginalize the regular season. It's quite the opposite, because look at how many teams have their backs against the wall that are saying, damn, we might get left out of this thing all of a sudden just because of a loss.
I have rolled my eyes epic proportions so many times, looking at or hearing conversations from college football playoff fans of, well, they only have 2 losses. They're fine. They'll get in. They'll get in. This game doesn't matter for the college football playoff. And I just want to say, you sure about that? Like, are you sure? Because the field feels like it's shrinking week by week by week. Whenever you only have 7 at-large bids, and you have 2 losses, and one of those losses, for a couple of examples, were to unranked teams, Alabama's to Vanderbilt, Texas A&M's to South Carolina's today. I mean, like, there have been some bad losses just in the SEC alone, and then we look at the rest of the college football field, like Clemson losing to Louisville today. Not all 2-loss teams are created equal. This whole idea of you are what your record says you are, I think, is a total and complete fallacy. And there was maybe a team that we actually talked about this last week. We didn't know really what to make of this team because we were too far along into the season for a team to just be bad but cosplay as a good team. But Adam, Pitt got their butts whooped by SMU today, and that shakes the ACC up a lot too.
And Pitt looked bad today. I mean, got ran off the field by SMU. Their defense was terrible. I mean, that Pat Narduzzi is known for having great defenses and the unique, chaotic scheme he runs on defense. They give up 500 yards to SMU. This Pitt team, we said it on the show last week. Is Pitt's season for real, or is it a house of cards? Well, that house of cards came crumbling down. And I want to give credit, though, to SMU. SMU looks really, really good right now. Only loss on the year is to an undefeated BYU team by 3 points. So Rhett Lashley, their head coach, has done a phenomenal job. They dominated Pitt today at home. Their quarterback, Kevin Jennings, played lights out, had 300-plus yards passing. SMU ran the football well. This is an SMU team, was ranked 20th in this past week's AP poll, that has a real chance to compete now for an ACC championship. And they look like they're in the driver's seat to be the team that plays Miami in the title game. You know, the rest of their season got a few more tough games, but man, SMU looks really good right now.
Miami's got to be frustrated though, right? Because Miami needs, it's not that they need, Miami would love to have an ACC championship game opportunity to really make a statement to help their seeding, to show everybody, to answer any questions. Like, anytime your conference stops getting benefit of the doubt, like, real question, we have spent most of the year trashing overall Big 12 football as like not really at the same level of everything else. Well, tell me now, what's the difference between the Big 12 and the ACC? Because I'm not hearing the same level of about the ACC that I am about the Big 12. And we're sitting here now looking at a day where Iowa State lost in the Big 12. Like, all of a sudden, we're looking at a Big 12 that just feels like nobody other than BYU is really trying to separate themselves. And I'm looking at an ACC where nobody other than Miami is really trying to separate themselves. And I'm looking at all of them saying, like, this has got to be frustrating if you're a team that's just taking down the next game in front of you, which is what all you can do. But you're not going to get the same level of credit from the committee that we're going to see other schools get that have gone through a tougher gauntlet. And that's nobody's fault, but that's real. Like, if I'm Miami, I'm frustrated that the rest of the ACC continues to let me down.
I'm playing the world's tiniest violin for a team that played an easy schedule. We won all of our games. We made it to the playoff, but we're not getting better seeding because we didn't play anyone good. Hello? Like, you won your games. You didn't play the stiffest of competition. That's not my fault. I don't feel bad for you because if Miami wins the ACC, which it feels like if I had to put my money on it today, I would put my money on Miami to win the ACC. Doesn't matter if the ACC is the most competitive conference in all of college football or the biggest joke of a conference in all of college football. You still get a first round bye. That first round bye counts the exact same as the SECs and the Big Tens and the Big 12s and the Group of Fives. So I boo freaking who. You're going to get schedule.
We're going to put a 1-loss or 2-loss, possibly SEC or Big Ten champion in above an undefeated ACC. Where they're going to get a higher seed, which means they're going to get a much easier matchup in this. Like, that's when they'll start crying. I'm with you. Maybe it doesn't matter. The top 4 seeds are all created equal, but they're not when we're looking at that next game. Like, you got a choice of taking on a lower seed or a higher seed. Like, it's just going to be a much tougher matchup. So that's where I think Miami's going to get frustrated because Miami's going to sit here. It's going to be Florida State all over again. Yes, they're going to make the playoff. I understand that. But Miami's going to sit here and say, damn, we're undefeated. We beat everybody. We're in the ACC. We beat everybody. We just destroyed everybody getting there. And we're the 4 seed? Like, we're the 3 seed? They're going to be angry if they're sitting below a Big Ten or an SEC team that doesn't have a 0 in the loss column, and none of them do.
Yeah, the other part of that, Fitz, is when you're Miami and haven't played any tough competition, I mean, you're going to play some tough teams in the playoff now. I mean, you're going to play teams that have defenses and some talent like you haven't seen before. So that's going to be Miami's biggest challenge once they get to the college football playoff and not having seen that tough defensive competition.
It's the college football playoff. Like, every team that you're going to play is going to be really good. At least that's what I think. Maybe there's going to be a few teams in there.
What it should be.
It's at least what it should be. And there's no doubt.
I'm not scared of Notre Dame. Oh, go ahead. We just had trashed Notre Dame today. So
we cannot get into that today. There's not enough time to get into Notre Dame gate of it all. But there is inevitably going to be a team that maybe gets an easier draw than another. That's just welcome to a tournament, welcome to a field. It's inevitable. That's going to happen. But if you want to be a national championship contender, if you want to win a national championship, you're going to have to beat really good teams, no matter if it comes in the first round of the playoffs or in the national championship game itself.
Hey guys, Indiana won again too. Can we just call that out real quick? 9-0 Indiana.
9-win Indiana.
Wow. They beat Michigan State. Let's calm it down, okay? But Sparty, first team to have a lead over Indiana all year. There we go.
Fitz's love affair with Michigan State is something that I will never be able to piece together in my head.
I figured it out. They're like Charlie Brown. I just feel bad for them. They keep running after the football and they fall. Like, there's this moment like, Michigan State is Charlie Brown, and I feel bad. Like, one of these days they're going to catch him. They were competitive with Ohio State for a quarter. They were competitive with Oregon for almost a half. They were competitive with Indiana for a quarter. Like, man, they're really building something there. I don't know. I just feel bad for them. I feel bad for Sparty.
They're building. They're having fun. They're making memories. They're creating friendships. We're making friendship bracelets and macaroni necklaces. It's all fun and games.
I wasn't told there'd be any macaroni necklaces. I would love some macaroni necklaces.
Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't? All right, that is going to do it for us today. A chaos day in college football. He's Adam Breneman. You can follow him on Twitter at Adam Breneman81. That's at Jason Fitz, and I am at Caroline Fenton 1. Like the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, review the podcast. Tell the ULM coach that chucked his headset across the field about the pod. I think it was wild, like a Hall of Fame headset throw. Tell all your friends. Tell your dad, because today's my dad's birthday. So happy birthday, Dad!
Oh, happy birthday, Dad!
We'll be back on Tuesday.
Happy birthday, Dad!
Thank you. We'll be back on Tuesday. College football playoff rankings for the first time this season. Finally, we made it. We never have to utter those 2 awful letters again, and that is AP. We never have to worry about it ever again for the rest of the 2024 season, but we'll be back on Tuesday. We're out.